Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special Weedy Virtual Spotlight from Data Exchange to Decision Making, Integrated Interoperability Platform and Prior Authorization Solution in Action for CMS-0057 compliance. This is sponsored by OneUp Health and Itiliti Health. It's my pleasure to introduce from OneUp Health, Jeremy Yoon, and from Itiliti Health, Keith Brick.
Thank you, Michael. It's great to be here. You'll hear my voice and hopefully see my face up there in the top. My name is Keith Brick. I'm your interoperability architect. Jeremy's getting our slide deck ready. Jeremy, right now we have the browser view.
Yeah. Can you see the full screen though? Is that all right?
It's just the browser view right now.
Okay. Let me see. Okay. Oh, Google Slides is not great. So I'm intentionally doing the browser view because otherwise it takes up my whole screen and then I'm not able to kind of navigate between the two. So
All right.
this is the view we'll be working with. Awesome. Yeah, and as a quick introduction, my name is Jeremy Yoon, Senior Product Manager here at OneUp Health. And Keith and I are excited to walk you through our presentation today. So I think I'll kick it off with just a high-level overview of the agenda, where we're going, and then I'll hand it off to you, Keith, to give us a high-level CMS overview, although I'm sure most of us here on the call
Sure.
are experts by this point, hopefully. So as an agenda, again, Keith is going to give us just a high-level touch point on the 0057F ruling, especially in the context of prior authorization. And then Keith will give a utility health overview, solution overview for prior auth. I'll be giving a OneUp Health overview, and then we'll spend the bulk of our conversation this afternoon talking about how Itiliti and OneUp Health are working together, how our synergies kind of unlock some key potential for improving prior authorization workflows today. And lastly, Keith and I are going to wrap up with a live demo of our solution so far. So anything else to add before we move on, Keith?
That's perfect. Thank you, Jeremy. Also, please feel free to ask questions in the chat. Whoever's not talking, we'll do our best to answer your questions interactively. And then at the end, we'll also have some time for Q&A. So just to jump right in, we all know that the final rule, CMS-0057F, defines prior authorization APIs that all of our payer community needs to have available and all of our providers need to be able to actually use. So how do we make those APIs work? Well, at its heart, within the payer enterprise, we have a source of truth, or in many cases today, many sources of truth for the prior authorization rules. What actually requires a prior auth? Which policies are referred to by which plans? That mapping lives somewhere, hopefully in a spreadsheet or a database, something that can be drawn from. And those policies and their guidelines have forms attached to them, right? So how do we serve all of that up to our providers who are working in their EHRs, working in their native workflows, trying to answer that question? Do I need to fill a prior authorization form out? Do I need to send it to the payer? Do I need to wait to schedule my patient until I get a response? And really the intent of these APIs is to make sure that we can get the provider the answer to that question, get them the forms to fill out, and get them an answer as quickly as possible. The final rule includes turnaround times for urgent requests, and even for standard requests have to be done really quickly. So in order to do that, we need automation. We can't count on human review for all of this, and we can't be digging through stacks of paper forms in order to figure this out. We need to give them an electronic way to get us the information that we need on the payer side in order to answer, can we get that prior authorization approved? Can we get them that prior auth number? So that's our goal. We've got the ingredients for filling out this workflow on the right-hand side, and we've got the providers working on the left-hand side. So how are we going to get it connected? Jeremy, I'll let you talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, thanks for teeing that up well. The goal of our presentation today is to walk you through what our CMS-0057 in the context of prior auth is very broad. But if you really take the 30,000 foot view, I think there are two key problem areas. And these two are ones that I think OneUp and Itiliti are uniquely positioned to solve it according to our strengths here. And so, I think the first problem when you look at that previous slide where you've got all these graphics representing different kinds of entities, you have EHRs, smart on fire applications, FHIR servers, different sources of truth that are spread across different kinds of vendors and different kinds of ecosystems. I think the main problem, one of the first problems that you can think about is in the case of many providers, multiple EHRs, multiple systems, how do I really connect everything into one prior authorization workflow? And so the goal of the presentation today is that you can see how OneUp Health is able to help you position or is positioned to help you solve some of those key interoperability problems. But I know Keith, from your guys' perspective on the utility side, there's also another key problem that you guys are solving and really focused on in the market as well.
Yeah. And so we talked about all those different sources of truth. Our goal is to give you one place to document, manage, and release and publish those policies and their associated questionnaires so that they can drive the APIs that OneUp Health can help you connect out to all of those provider participants. So we'll talk a little bit about the ingredients, how those pieces of the puzzle fit together. And I want to make sure that we all are thinking about it's not just the APIs in 2027, it's about how do we make this process better today? You've got websites, you've got provider portals, you've got third-party integrations, delegated vendors that you're working with. All of those things, every single step of the way can be made better. And every step of automation means faster patient care, better outcomes. So let's dig into some of the details. So Itiliti Health, our background is really solving this problem for Blue Cross Blue Shield Minnesota. So we grew out of their development initiatives to tackle each of these problems along the workflow. We start with the provider right there in their EHR placing the order, and they need to place that order with knowledge about the patient's coverage and policy, and we need to get them the answer of is prior authorization required as quickly as possible. So today they get that answer through our website, they get that answer through the provider portals, they can log in and they can actually submit that information electronically today using our web integrations. But behind the scenes, that web integration is using these same APIs and it's talking to our rules engine, the automatic authorization rules engine, in order to calculate those answers whenever we get all the right answers up front. If there's missing documentation, we can immediately give them an answer that says, hey, you'll need to also provide this piece of information so that we can complete that clinical review. And we've got a tool that helps when you're dealing with large submissions, hundreds of pages of medical records that your clinical reviewers need to dig through. That's a great place to use AI to highlight this piece of text actually answers the question that was posed in form 3.2.1. So now we can get them an immediate approval. Like I said, we grew out of a payer, and so we're really familiar with those problems that we're trying to solve. And we're solving those problems today at scale for not just the single workflow of making sure your call center is able to get a quick answer, but also automating the processing of inbound faxes, making sure that the provider portal, whenever a policy is updated, immediately shows up on the website, that all those effective dates are kept in sync, and that you get the same answer, whether you're doing it over the phone, by fax, through the website, or starting in 2027 through those APIs. So the three steps of the workflow, I think I covered briefly, but I want to explain where our products fit in just real quick. Prior authorization checkpoint, or PA checkpoint, is where we host the answer to the question, is prior authorization required? Our rules database compares the information in a provider's order to the policies that you've published and allows you to calculate the answer that says, yes, prior auth might be required. Here are the forms you'll need to fill out. Those forms live in our policy management database. They could be forms that you've created as a payer. They could be created by the Blue Cross Blue Shield Association. They could be from Medicare, Medicaid. They could be from a delegated vendor like Interqual or MCG. So we need to be able to bring all of that knowledge together and serve it up with one API, because that's what CMS-0057 says the providers need to be able to rely on. And then in that final step, once they've filled out those forms, they need to submit it to us electronically, but they're not going to be sending it by fax anymore. They're not going to be sending it over the web. They're going to be sending it through an API, which technically travels over the internet, but it's not a website. No more portals to log into. It'll be electronically integrated directly with their EHR. So, Jeremy, you're going to help us make that happen, right?
Yes, yeah, I think this is one of the several graphics that we have peppered throughout the rest of this slide deck that just talks about how our deep integration between our two companies and our platforms is able to really unlock the compliance and help you not only meet CMS-0057, but at the end of the day, really use the 0057 opportunity as in some ways, a launch pad to modernizing your prior authorization workflow and bringing in modern technology that's being used across the industry, but not in healthcare, to really speed up the process here. So when we think about the natural areas where we lean in, OneUp historically has been more so focused on healthcare interoperability, being a FHIR server and a FHIR transformation layer. That really fits in naturally in the context of this workflow here. Again, you're seeing the same version of the diagram that we showed at the top of this call here, but essentially OneUp is in some ways the kind of foundational connectivity layer. And so as we work with Itiliti Health, we decided to be able to focus on what we're good at. And so we are focusing in on making sure that there's a provider network that's able to access these endpoints that are discoverable through many means, primarily through our OneUp developer portal. And then because of our integration with Itiliti, and I think this is the opportunity for us to really talk about the importance of FHIR, I think as just kind of a big picture concept, because we are both speaking the same FHIR language, per se, we're able to then really have a tight integration wherein we are intaking requests, we're processing them accordingly, and then we're able to really immediately communicate with Itiliti's platform, whether it's answering questions for CRD, being able to query their endpoints to get their medical policies that they've created on their platform. Or most importantly, be able to then submit a prior authorization to Itiliti's auto auth module, wherein Itiliti is able to tell us sometimes instantaneously whether or not a prior authorization has been approved or denied. And I think, in the middle of that, you need that connectivity layer, you need the FHIR server, and that's the role that we play. That's really a natural complement to a lot of the core technologies that Itiliti has created already. So
Exactly. You've got that interoperability layer, and you've got
mhm.
that source of truth where all of your business logic, your rules, and your forms live. You got to plug those in together in order to make sure that the provider gets their answer without having to leave the EHR.
Mhm.
All right. So during the implementation process, we're trying to get you away from those spreadsheets. We're trying to get you away from the many different sources of truth into one single answer. And we recognize that today policies are probably managed in a document management system or a PDF set of forms that are published on your website, but not necessarily directly the same things that your staff are using when they pick up at the call center or processing a claim. So if we can consolidate all of that, make sure that it's all exactly in sync, it reduces those errors. It allows us to produce that automation, get you that faster turnaround time. And we recognize that today there's a ton of complexity. We started with the Blue Cross Blue Shield plan, and we know that every single payer has their own sort of structure, but at its heart, the relationship between what a doctor orders and what they need to provide in order to obtain a prior authorization, those concepts are fundamentally pretty well defined by the specification. That's what FHIR does. The Da Vinci implementation guides give us a framework for that information that needs to be shared between the provider and the payer. And so we're going to use the APIs in order to transmit that data back and forth. And the great news is it's not just OneUp Health, it's not just Itiliti Health, it's Epic and Oracle, it's all of our delegated vendors that host third-party policies, and it's the national networks that are going to help facilitate this connectivity because we've all agreed across the industry to speak FHIR. So what did we do? We started with those EHR integrations, doing our proof of concept directly with the EHR vendors. You're seeing here, right within a provider's workflow, they can get an immediate answer that, yep, auth is required, and this task can be filled out and completed by their admin or support staff. Whatever information that used to be fetched by logging into a website is now living directly inside Epic or Oracle or Meditech. And today, we ingest thousands of policies and thousands of procedure codes in order to make sure that we can do this. Next slide.
There's a quick question that might be relevant here.
Sure.
It says, is there a central place all the payers need to publish their prior auth API information as a part of the mandate?
So today, there are unfortunately not nationwide solutions for this. what the industry is working towards is a centralized registry that allows all the participants within TEFCA, for example, to host their endpoints and to make those endpoints available, including the authorization method. How do you get connected to those endpoints within the directory for the TEFCA network? But as of February of 2026, there is not a good solution. And that's really why it's valuable to have an interoperability layer like OneUp Health to help facilitate that connectivity, to start onboarding your partners right now so that you can begin establishing that trust between the providers and the payers so that they can begin exchanging this data even before the federal government comes in and says, you have to do this.
Right. Yeah. And just to briefly touch on how OneUp is supporting this model, I talked about earlier our OneUp Dev Portal, which is a website in a centralized place where we are hosting all of the API information for the plans that we are supporting. And so payers may choose to do that on their own websites. We've seen talks of potentially, I think WEDI has talked about having some kind of a centralized directory for all the different endpoints here. But in the absence of that, I think we as a company are also trying to recognize that sometimes you just need one link and one website to go to get some kind of information for at least a certain set of payers. So I think collectively we're all tackling it on our own. But as Keith, as you said, I think as the industry matures, as we get into 2027 and beyond, I'm sure a more centralized solution will come in place.
I see another great question in the chat that I think is relevant to this slide, which is, what does it mean to ingest a policy? I mean, literally taking a PDF, whether it's a text or a scan, and bringing that text directly into the policy management application of Itiliti Health. And then parsing that algorithmically, not with AI, but actually with an algorithm that says this language results in these criteria that have Boolean logic applied to them that must be evaluated in order to determine whether a particular case meets the prior authorization criteria. So we'll start with real documents and we'll help you transform them all the way into a discrete policy that is computable with the associated codes that an API and an electronic health record can interact with. And we've built tools to help you each step of the way. All right, so we understand that there are a lot of challenges today that we can help with. We know that the benefits determination or that real-time eligibility check that providers are doing doesn't really answer the question of, is prior authorization required? It might say, in general, prior auth is needed for Keith to have his 40th physical therapy appointment, but it doesn't say which types of physical therapy he's already had. So in that scenario, the CRD process, coverage requirements discovery, allows the provider to say, this is exactly what my patient needs. Based on exactly what my patient needs, what policies apply? What do I need to do next? And when we're trying to build questionnaires on the payer side, we're trying to take what is today a paper form or a URL that they visit and type in information in order to hit submit. We're trying to take that and bring it into the provider's EHR so that as much as possible, they're not re-entering information that they've already documented about that patient. The goal is for the EHR to be able to answer those questions. For example, does Keith have a BMI over 35? Well, the EHR knows that. The doctor and their staff, they've already recorded my height and weight. A provider doesn't need to type that information into a form anymore. The EHR has it recorded discreetly. It can use that to answer that question. So if your policy says, based on the patient's BMI, we're going to have a different set of criteria, now we can serve up that exact set of criteria. And ultimately, our goal is to say, providers, you can start doing this right now. You don't need to wait for federal requirements to hit. You don't need to wait for, on the payer side, you don't need to wait for providers to come along that say, my EHR supports this, hook me up. You can start using it directly with your website. That's what we've done for Minnesota, Alabama, our Blue Cross customers. So we're really excited to be able to, with the help of OneUp Health, let you connect to anyone that you would like to connect to. And ultimately, we know that those providers, they're going to be using a lot of different software, but the vendors that are producing that electronic health record software, they have a requirement to move towards this language so that we're all able to talk to one another.
Yeah, and I'll just take the opportunity to chime in here. We're getting a lot of questions, so appreciate that. We are planning to reserve some time at the end for questions as well. But in the sake of time, I think we'll just try to continue our way through the conversation. But someone had asked about TEFCA or QHIN, and I think just wanted to take the opportunity, as Keith was touching on, the network aspect of it. It's true that TEFCA or QHIN is not required. And it's just one of the several ways in which we could potentially integrate. And so there's no stopping through an intermediary like OneUp Health to have a direct integration with an EMR, whether it's Epic, Athena, whoever it may be, Meditech, or potentially you could do it through QHIN as well. And just kind of harkening back to when Keith and I first met, I want to say this was over a year ago at this point, at one of the January Connectathon, or I guess a year ago at this point, at the January 2025 Connectathon. We had worked at that time with representatives from Epic, but we had done a workflow where it was Epic to QHIN, a QHIN eHealth exchange, to our system, to Itiliti. And that was just a way for us to be able to really understand the proof of concept and bring it to life in terms of, are we able to have flexible intake approaches and different ways to get this authorization data ultimately into a platform like Itiliti. So.
Awesome. So I mentioned Smart on FHIR. So Smart on FHIR was our industry's early attempt to give providers something that they could start using right away. It would be an application that they launch out to from their EHR, and it would bring with them their identity and the context of the patient in order to then pull whatever forms were provided by the policy and start matching them up to one another. The reality is Smart on FHIR is a good starting point, but it does still take the provider out of their electronic health record. So moving forward into the future, what we're seeing is that the big vendors, everybody that is a certified EHR technology, they have to implement this technology natively. So that means the provider, right when they place the order, behind the scenes, the electronic health record is reaching out to that patient's coverage, saying, all right, their coverage is provided by this plan. This plan publishes their web server, and it's right here, it's connected. So we're bringing them today into portals, we're bringing them today into Smart on FHIR applications, but in the future, we need to be able to do that also directly with the Epics and Meditechs of the world. And so those EHR vendors are on their own side, connecting to those national networks, they're connecting to their QHINs, they're connecting to their interoperability platforms, whether it's one that they've developed themselves or one that they've created to build a pipeline for them. And on our side, our goal is to make sure all the payers are able to speak this language so that we can drive together the industry towards adoption with or without external regulations. This is a win-win. So it makes the providers happy if they can get quick answers, and it makes the payers happy if they are able to get consistent answers and get electronically the information that today they're spending a lot of money trying to parse through manual workflows. So let's talk about how those pieces fit together. We described, I'll let you start on the left and then I'll describe the right and a little bit of the overlap.
Sure. Again, as I talked about earlier, we've got a lot of different graphics to help you represent. I think as OneUp Health and Itiliti Health have been partnering in the industry, we've come across some confusion. Why do I need both? When do I use OneUp Health? When do I use Itiliti Health? And so speaking to, I think the part that we are both speaking, we talked about it earlier, but we're both speaking FHIR. And, that's a more colloquial way of saying that we have FHIR APIs that we are then using to integrate across our two platforms. And at the end of the day, that's the core foundation of our integration. But as we've alluded to a lot here on the OneUp Health side, we're focused in on the networking, especially focusing in on the provider network across EHRs and EMRs as our first pass. But again, as we've said, we've done proof of concept with QHINs. We're looking at external data sources as well. And I'll get into it here in a little bit through the OneUp Health overview, but because we have a modern data platform, you get security, monitoring, and reportability, data visibility, all those great things as well as the opportunity to then, in today's scope, have some data quality assurance, some lightweight data analytics. But as we really think about the unlock for the future of having all of your authorizations flow through a FHIR server, as Keith and I have been chatting over the past few months, there's a lot of fantastic opportunities. I think the obvious one is is there missing data that is on the FHIR server that could be relevant for this prior auth? Being able to pull those into the transaction. And so that when Itiliti Health is making their adjudication, they have a much more complete patient record or complete view of the patient. But also additional capabilities, knowing that we have support for the other Access APIs and we've got a lot of other kind of data on our platform. How can we be smart about integrating that data into the prior authorization workflow as well? So that's our side. Keith, you want to speak to the green circle on the Itiliti side?
Yeah. So in order to make all of that connectivity have the answer, it's great to hook up an API, but if the API doesn't know the answer and can't provide it in a computable way, you haven't gotten anywhere. So we believe that you need a product like Itiliti Health to unify and digitize your policies. You can't just point to provider, go to our website. You have to actually go to the website, go to your policy library, and pull the relevant policy that matches up what they're ordering. And from that policy, you need to be able to provide a set of questionnaires that prompt the provider and their EHR to electronically give you the information you need to make a decision. So having that single source of truth for does it require prior auth means that you need a policy library. And in order to provide automation that will get you to those fast turnaround times, that's really the heart of CMS-0057 is to be able to provide rapid turnaround times for those prior authorizations. You need to be able to enable automation. And so that's why we think you should not only digitize those policies, but make them computable using our tools.
Awesome. Sounds good. Briefly getting into a OneUp Health overview as well. I do see some questions around there. I believe, Keith, you and I have teammates that are answering them. So again, we'll try to touch on some of the big ones here at the end of the call. But OneUp Health, just for those who are unaware, our core mission is to enable the seamless data exchange across the healthcare ecosystem. Essentially, we are trying to become, in some ways, the kind of default interoperability layer that's very much needed to take disparate data sources, make them connected, so that in the context of your EHR, providers and patients are able to see their full patient record. And when we think about vendors like Itiliti Health, who are responsible for making key decisions and adjudicating prior authorizations, how can we ensure that they have the right data in place to then apply their rules and their logic to that? And all of this, the foundation of our platform or the foundation of our product offering is built on the OneUp platform. And this is a modern data management platform that's purpose-built, again, for healthcare data exchange. And so just at a really high level, some of the core features of our platform is flexible data ingestion and a conversion pipeline. So taking non-FHIR formats, turning it into FHIR and other formats as well. And we've touched on this a lot, but an extensive network of payer, provider, and third-party app endpoints that we manage. And again, we are trying to be the network in some ways, and so that when anybody has a question or anybody's trying to get a certain piece of data, they know that OneUp Health can potentially get them connected to that, as well as additional data control and data visibility. So we have robust access controls and data filtering capabilities built into all of that. And in the context of 0057, I know we're talking about prior authorization, so I'll just touch on this really briefly. I did want to call out that we have full compliance support for the entire 0057 regulation. So access APIs, peer-to-payer, provider access, patient access, as well as the prior authorization endpoints as well. And our 0057 product offering really builds on the success and authority that we established in the industry through our 9115 offering. So we're building on some of the laurels that we've built out through the previous CMS overview. So getting into EPA specifically, we've touched on it here and there throughout, but overall, our EPA solution is a modular platform that can be adapted to fit the wide-ranging needs that a payer may have in the industry. And so at the foundation of this platform, as we've talked about here, are the CRD, DTR, and PAS endpoints. These are the three FHIR APIs that are called out as recommended in the CMS-0057 guideline. And all of these sit within the context of our intelligent routing engine. And so what we'll get into a little bit later, but this intelligent routing engine is what enables us to then have connectivity to systems like Itiliti. I think I saw some comments and questions in the chat about MCG, Interqual, and other kinds of vendors. And you really have an options there. And we have a slide to cover that. But Itiliti can handle that direct connection, but it may make sense for OneUp Health to handle that direct connection as well. And so that's all really powered by our intelligent routing engine. And the main purpose of that intelligent routing engine is to be able to take multiple inputs. So, eventually get connected with, all the EHRs and major EMRs across the industry, have those come into a centralized place, and then be able to output that to a single system of record like Itiliti Health for processing, and then take that information and then aggregate that back out. So when we think about CRD specifically, Keith walked us through a lot of what Itiliti is doing in terms of documentation management, policy ingestion. Our complement to that is that for our CRD, we kind of take a flexible approach there. And so we recognize that there are times where some payers have really clean, structured data. There's a spreadsheet that has really, simple binary rules for whether or not you require prior authorization or not. And so those loads could be very simply loaded onto our CRD server. But I think for the most case across the industry, these rules are then actually not in a clean format, but you need somebody to help you clean that up. And that's where Itiliti comes in. And so in those cases, our CRD server can function as a proxy, and ultimately through our intelligent routing engine, be able to proxy Itiliti's endpoints to get information about a particular authorization. We also offer a couple web tools. And so I talked at length a little bit earlier about our OneUp Dev portal. This is the main function that's behind what you see on the screen for provider registration. And I think all of us here across a board can recognize that providers in some way have the most power, as in they can continue to use their means of submitting prior authorizations today, although we think that this new workflow is much better. But there's not a really strong mandate on their side for them to be able to use these APIs or not. And so as a part of that, we're working on investing in tooling that makes at least there's a centralized location for all the endpoints, as well as just really simple, lightweight tools to help them in the process. As well as our OneUp console is where we have our prior authorization reporting, data visibility, analytics that we talked about. And lastly, I think just given the opportunity to have all of these authorizations flow through a modern data management platform like ours, we make all of this available over real-time streaming data feeds, mainly Kafka queues. And so, the use case today for that is what we can think of is, providers in the context of their EHR are going to be able to follow along with the decision or the status of their prior authorization. But perhaps there's a member app or a web portal or some other kind of tool that you would like to be able to give the member or somebody else visibility into that status. And so because all of those transactions are flowing through our workplace, we've made the decision to make these available over consumable event streams as well. And so that's the OneUp platform in a nutshell for EPA. And when we think about how then does this work with Itiliti, I kind of talked about it here already, but again, really want to hone in on the intelligent routing and the CRD server. As Keith talked about, many times these rules are written in human readable context that as a reviewer is sitting there, they can understand what this means. But a computer needs, kind of data cleaned up in a certain way. And so there are going to be several times where that information is in a PDF and it's written down in a format that then needs to be transformed into computable logic. And so that's where our integration with Itiliti Health really comes to life, as in we're handling the integration between the EHR, the provider network, making sure that they can have a centralized place to send authorizations to. And then on the other side, because there's complexity around, somebody needs to have seen somebody at least 12 times and then they get approved or denied for a particular prior authorization. Those kinds of rules are oftentimes very complex and hard to create. And so that's what Itiliti Health is doing on their platform. And then our system is able to query their endpoints, query their platform to get answers to those particular questions there. And so as we get into the demo here, I know we have a couple more things that we're going to show you, but overall, I'll take the first stab at walking through this kind of a gnarly workflow here. And then Keith, I'd love to hand it off to you.
Sure.
But this is just another way of representing everything that I talked about here. So I really want to center you on the first half or the upper half of the screen. And so starting off with the first step here, this is all provider driven in the context of their EHR. Through CDS hooks, they're invoking OneUp Health CRD endpoint. And in this case, where we have integration with Itiliti, our CRD server is in its proxy layer or proxy mode. And what we then do is we forward that request over to Itility's PA checkpoint product. Their checkpoint product, which is the underlying underpinnings of their CRD endpoint, is able to then respond to us with whether or not prior authorization is required. They will also then return a questionnaire in the context where it is. And then, we basically are transacting that flow back and forth here. And so you're going to see a preview of that here in a live demo in a second. But before we get there, Keith, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
You've got it exactly right. So behind the scenes, we have a policy that we've configured in PA checkpoint. It's going to answer that question of, does this gastrointestinal procedure require prior auth? The answer is going to be yes. And then in the second step, it's going to write to the EHR, provide that questionnaire that needs to be filled out.
Yeah, that sounds great. And so just one more kind of touch point before we get into the demo here. Again, in some ways, there may be a little bit of confusion. It's, well, Itiliti has their PA checkpoint product. Jeremy just walked us through one up CRD server. They seem like they're doing the same thing. Why would I then use one or the other? Why would I use both? And so we just wanted to really make it kind of plain and simple. Again, we are focusing in our core product offerings, I'd say, are in different areas. When we think about the two problems we talked about, one problem is, how do I get connected across my ecosystem? The other problem, very important, is how do I then manage this kind of all the documentation that I need to then transform it and modify. And so OneUp Health is handling the network problem. Itiliti is handling more of the documentation problem, but there's a little bit of overlap when we think about CRD. And so I'll just talk you through where OneUp Health excels when it comes to CRD, and then I'll pass it off to Keith here for Itiliti. But
Perfect.
in the context where the health plan rules are already structured, so I talked about this, and we have a couple of our customers already that they've done the investment to say that I have everything in a really clean spreadsheet, and I just need this to be made available over your CRD endpoint. We're able to ingest that onto our platform. We can transform that, and we can make that executable across the workflow. But as we talked about, Keith, I'll hand it off to you. Many times that doesn't happen. So, Keith, I'll hand it off to you to talk about the other side of it.
Yeah, and I see a question in the chat from Nina, and I want to make sure that this is really what we're trying to answer today. You need an API. Itiliti Health has the API, and you need to be able to connect that API to your providers, make sure that they can access it. OneUp Health provides you that interoperability to make that happen. That API also needs to have a backend. It has to have a source of truth. It has to have business logic. Where does that business logic live? Today, it's in paper policies. We help you translate that up into the electronic world and associate it with discrete criteria. So if you need to build out the discrete criteria, if you need to build out the FHIR questionnaires, those JSON objects that can be parsed by an EHR, that's what you'll use Itiliti Health's tools to do. If you need help parsing all that documentation, all that FHIR stuff that you got from the EHR, and you need to find which parts of that FHIR document actually satisfy your criteria, that's what our tools can help you do. But in terms of where do you store all of that FHIR data that's been submitted, or how do you get it to and from those places? I think, Jeremy, that's really where your product is most able to help.
Yeah, agreed. Awesome. So I think, well, a couple more pieces before we get to the live demo, but I know, Keith, you wanted to talk a little bit more about your guys' ability to create the FHIR questionnaire, an example of which we're going to see here in a little bit.
Exactly. We have a couple of questions about that. So here's a quick screenshot of what that looks like. Literally, it's the human readable text on the left. We ingest that policy text, and we translate it into Boolean logic criteria on the right. We do this with a concrete algorithmic process. It's not a natural language model. It is actually discrete rules that your providers and staff can look at and say, yes, this does accurately represent our logic. It's going to be 100% right once everybody's reviewed it. And you don't have to worry about hallucinated text or, ambiguous sentences confusing providers who are trying to say, oh, did I give you everything you need? And what does that discrete computable form look like? Well, behind the scenes, it's JSON. It's a FHIR questionnaire package, and that questionnaire is exactly what's going to go across the wires through OneUp Health into the EHR during this demo. So they're going to request an order, and we're going to answer, yes, it requires prior auth. It's going to come out to us and say, well, what form do I need to fill out? And we'll return that form, and this is what it'll look like.
Awesome. Oh, all right.
And
I
we
think
can talk
that's my
about
cue
automation later.
yeah,
Let's
yeah.
do the
We can
demo.
talk about that at the end. So, as I tee this up, what you're looking at here is Nucurol, which is a EHR that we use internally as a test platform. Its founder is somebody that I've been able to get connected with over the past year or so, being involved in the industry work group. And so, if you have questions about that, I would love to get you in touch with him as well. But this is, you can just remove the logo. It's going to look different, but you can imagine this is Epic, Meditech, Athena, etc. And what the provider is going to do is we can imagine that they're sitting with their patient in the room, and the patient is in front of them, and they're beginning to understand that, oh, there is a specific procedure. In this case, it's a gastric specific one that they're going to need to then see if they need a pre-approval for, and if so, what are the requirements, or what additional data do I need to then provide to the provider. And so as I walk through this here, in some ways, this is going to look a little bit uneventful. And I think that's the intention, is that this process becomes a very simple process for the provider. But what's happening behind the scenes is really where all the complexity and the magic, for lack of better words, is happening. So what I'm doing here is, in the context of this EHR, I'm starting a new visit. And I will take the moment to say that Encounter Start is actually one of the CDS hooks, or to put it in more plain language, one of the opportunities where the EHR can then automatically invoke the endpoint. In this case here, we are not using the Encounter Start CDS hook, but these are the opportunities where a provider clicks a button, and as long for them, they're just clicking a button, but actually, because of these technologies, FHIR, CDS hooks, etc., there's actually a lot of things that is happening behind the scenes here. And so ultimately, I'm going to get to a place where I'm going to then realize, as a provider, I want to submit a request for a particular procedure here. And in today's example, we are looking at this one. And as I do so, I am going to then get to a point where I can sign this order. Oh, I might have to refresh here. Oh dear. Usually I'm able to sign the order. There should be a button that pops up. Let me try this again, if you don't mind. And if not, I did record one in the morning just in case, because of course it works before I get on the call, and then I get on the call and it just doesn't want to work here. So apologies for walking you through this again, but quickly going to add a visit, add in a procedure code request. Going to save that request. And yes, interestingly, I am not getting, there should be an order sign button here. So I'm just going to call an audible and switch over to this screen recording. If you don't mind giving me a second here. So this video here, let me speed through it. There's some portions. Okay, so we got to the point where we signed, or we saved the request, and now, oh, might just have to drag it like this. Okay. Yes, here is the button that should be appearing. Not sure why it's not appearing, but yes, once I sign the order here, what's happening is that the EHR, Nucurol, is calling the order signed CDS hook, which is then associated with OneUp Health's CRD endpoint. And then our CRD endpoint in this particular configuration is then configured to proxy Itiliti Health's endpoint. And all of this is going to happen pretty quickly. But in the background, essentially what's happening is that we are receiving the request. There's a validation that happens to make sure that all the applicable fields are filled out. That's happening on our end. Once we determine that that's a good request, that it has a complete enough data, we send that over to Itiliti's CRD endpoint. And then what you're going to see here in a little bit is Itiliti is going to respond with yes, prior authorization is required, as well as a DTR questionnaire that they've generated that's going to be relevant for this procedure. And so you're going to see that here in a little bit.
There's a great question here in the chat from Diane.
Hmm.
Is this intended to be real time? And the answer is yes. These APIs can provide an answer immediately, especially when we're talking about a prior authorization requirement that says you need to do X, Y, or Z first before you complete this therapy. Or
Hmm.
if there's a medication that's on the formulary, you might want to suggest that alternative during the ordering process so that the provider can discuss it with the patient. When it comes to filling out the questionnaire, though, often that will be done after the encounter with the help of the clinical or admin staff. And so this isn't a web
Correct.
portal. This is right in the provider's EHR experience. They're saying that, yes, this provider does, or this procedure does require prior authorization.
Yeah, and what you're seeing here now is I'm going to be launching the DTR module or their questionnaire module, and what's happening here is that earlier on a slide, Keith showed you an example of, we had the FHIR JSON object on the left, and then we had this kind of nice, clean, readable format. And so in this case, just to really walk you through this, the responsibility of OneUp is to query Itility's endpoint. Itility has that created JSON package that we are receiving, and then we are sending it back to in this case, Nucurl, and then Nucurl itself has the UI tools to be able to render this questionnaire. And so this is an example. We don't have the pre-filled functionality working for this particular example, but the idea is that in some context, there will be, again, patient information that's in the EHR or potentially in OneUp's FHIR repository that can then be automatically answering these questions on their behalf. In the case that there is additional information required, this is where the provider in the context of their EHR is able to do this and not have to then float over to a portal or log out or swivel their chair to something else. And then lastly here, what they're going to do is they're going to prepare the prior authorization for this particular EHR. This is how it works. And then lastly, submit the prior authorization to, in this case, what we're doing is submitting to Itility's endpoint. And so from a demo perspective, we're pausing right before the PAS endpoint. We're still both collectively working on getting that integration up and running. But what you would expect to happen there at the end is for them, we submit the PAS through the PAS endpoint. We submit that prior authorization to Itility, and then Itility is able to make that adjudication. So, I think Keith, you were
Perfect.
going to talk a little bit more about what that process looks like on your side.
Yeah, and this is a great way to answer Chris's question. So um, Itiliti Health supports all of this, not just because it's nice to have a beautiful library that is on your website, but also so that you can automate this process of getting an answer as quickly as possible. So what we found during our implementations is that by having a single source of truth that can electronically answer this question, is prior authorization required, actually reduces your prior authorization volume by 30%. Because those prior authorizations, if they're not required, you don't need the provider to send you a form. You don't need to process a whole stack of faxed information. So the provider saves time and you save time. And then for 85% of what remains, those prior authorizations can be automated and we can say, yes, you're approved. Thank you for providing everything that we asked for, because we can match up what was provided by the physician and their staff to what the policy says must be provided. And if we see that every single bullet point's been met, great. They've got a prior authorization number. They're ready to go. They can schedule that patient right away. And then for the 15% that's left, after we've eliminated the unnecessary ones, after we've automated the ones where everything's been provided as required, if there is a physical review, that human can be supported by an AI that helps them parse through that documentation, find the relevant parts of clinical documentation that match up to those criteria. So we turned everything in the policy into bullet points. Now let's match up those bullet points to the text or the discrete values within the patient's chart. And yeah, that
Yeah.
is intended to support the prior authorization submission itself. And we do connect that to the utilization management system. We make sure that the prior authorization number that's issued is in the UM system so that when the claim comes in, it can be matched right up with the documentation that was already submitted. Again, we've saved even more time for the provider because they're not sending it a second time with the claim. It's already there. The payer knows that it's good to go.
Yeah, thanks for walking us through that. So, as we get to the end of the presentation, I think we've got a lot of questions here. I'm excited about that. So I think Keith and I will just spend time answering some specific questions as they come up. But just again, just as a really high level recap, hopefully this is just, you've gotten it and you'd said, okay, I've heard it enough times. But the areas where we're, again, sharing information and where we're integrating is over FHIR. But those two kind of core main problems around network connectivity and the documentation management, and being able to transform those documentation, those are the areas where OneUp Health and Itiliti Health are able to complement each other. And it's really the synergy of our two products and two platforms working together that will then unlock not just CMS-0057 compliance to be compliant, but really give you the opportunity as a payer to bring some really exciting modernization and automation to your prior authorization workflow. And so I know that there's a couple questions that I've read that I'd love to be able to answer specifically. But before I get there, Keith, are any of their closing thoughts for the broader group before we get into detailed
Sure.
question and answer?
I think this slide will probably be a good place to stay as we're answering questions. I want to use it to answer one from Chris. There's a lot of questions on that form. Do we expect the provider to fill all that out during an encounter? Absolutely not. We expect that the questionnaires are going to be filled out after a clinical encounter. Typically, most of those questions will be able to be answered automatically by the EHR. So if the patient's height and weight and blood glucose have all been documented in the EHR, it can serve those up as the answers to the clinical query language that we help you build into the questionnaire. So if there's a question that asks for that information and the EHR has it, it can turn it over to you without requiring a provider to click anything. And then when there is documentation, like a clinical note that would answer the question of, well, has the patient had therapy in the last 9 months? Maybe that's reflected in a clinical note. That's where you would find the answer. That will be in a document. That's an attachment to the questionnaire. And then our AI can help you parse that and say, yep, it clearly says the patient started therapy in 2024. They've been doing therapy consistently since then. That's information that we got from the provider, but it wasn't discrete. And so we needed a way to parse through that in order to make sure it really did answer that question.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I wanted to answer a question from Meryl around, would like to hear more about the process occurring behind the scenes, such as how you are encoding orderable procedures and services. So I know
Yeah,
that we both have a part to play here. I will say on the OneUp Health side, I think what you're touching at, maybe intentionally or unintentionally, is this concept of, do providers really know billing codes? They probably speak more clinical coding, ICD-10, et cetera, SNOMED. Who is then handling that translation to a CPT code? Is that going to be a human, or in the lack of a human in the loop, what system is doing that? And so from one Health perspective, especially when we think about SNOMED to CPT, in some ways, we are waiting to see what AMA and the industry is going to be doing. They recently announced that one of the Da Vinci events that they're going to be releasing a free code walk set, code crosswalk set here at some point in 2026. And so because of our positioning as being that middleman, I think our position is to be able to ingest those kinds of code crosswalk sets and then be able to then say, we recognize this clinical code should then match up to the CPT code. And so that's how we're handling it on our side. And in the case where a payer may have specific code crosswalks that are relevant for their particular provider network, we're able to ingest that onto our platform and apply that during our CRD server and intelligent routing process. But I know, Keith, that's also a problem that's really relevant for your side as well. So curious to hear your thoughts on Itility's handling of these kinds of behind the scenes processes.
sure. Yeah, and we are directly engaged with the AMA and participating in these conversations industry-wide to help make sure that the provider's workflow where they're placing the order, they don't need to know those billing codes. They don't need to memorize a CPT code. They can just say, I'm going to perform this clinical procedure. And then within the electronic health record, that's been linked to the appropriate charge codes behind the scenes. That way, when the information is sent from the EHR to the payer, it includes that relevant information. And like you said, the ideal world is that the provider just does their job and all this happens invisibly behind the scenes
Mhm.
because of those crosswalks that have been provided by the industry.
Yeah. I think I'm also curious to hear more, but Rupesh asked the question about what standard formats, if any, are you using on the utility side to store medical policies and eligibilities parsed from PDF?
Yeah. So the questionnaire itself is stored as a standard FHIR questionnaire bundle. The policy includes additional metadata that today doesn't have a good industry standard representation. So we've built our own JSON structure that captures things like the relationship between a code and a policy, the effective dates, and things like that. So if you are using Itiliti Health and want to ingest a policy published by another Itiliti Health customer, we build those networks to make that possible. That's part of what we're helping our Blue Cross Blue Shield customers do. And our goal is also to work with the states to help standardize those policies so that ideally all the payers aren't rewriting the state's policy or the state's forms. They're providing a standard questionnaire that the EHR can reliably fill out. And what that unity does across the industry is it says, hey, everybody, if you document in this way, you no longer need to fill out these forms because your EHR will be able to answer the questions that the payer has, that the Medicare or Medicaid plan has. And now you've saved that time for your staff. They're no longer filling in faxes or filling in websites. You're just doing your job, and that's satisfying the needs of the decision-making process.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we're getting a lot more questions coming in here. Just trying to scroll through. Keith, are there any more that are standing out to you that we'd love to walk through live?
So I hear a question from Chris about have payers asked for One Up Health and Itiliti to help manage the communication back to the providers? And the answer is yes, absolutely. And it's built into the workflow today or rather, it's built into the CMS-0057 workflow for a prior authorization submission to be sent electronically and for the status of that to be checked electronically by the EHR. The EHR can either poll and ask for information, or it can subscribe to updates. So for example, if I'm the provider and I'm ordering something for Jeremy to have later, I want to subscribe because I'm going to need to know to schedule that appointment as soon as it's been approved. But if I am Jeremy's provider and we're having a clinical encounter in the clinic, but later we're going to have a surgical encounter at the hospital EHR will need to go and pull or request information about Jeremy's prior authorizations, the ones that have been recently approved. And so that both of those workflows are designed to work electronically through the PAS $inquire operation or $subscribe operations.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm seeing a follow-up from Cheryl as well. With regards to LOINC to CPT, as far as I know, Keith, I don't know if you've heard anything from the industry, but I know that AMA specifically mentioned SNOMED to CPT. So I think both of us have our ears to the ground or boots to the ground, whatever the phrase is here. Keith and I are both very involved in the Da Vinci community, WEDI community, and industry groups as well. So if you're interested in following along, please reach out to one of us. Actually, probably a good opportunity to put our contact here on the slide just in case.
Yeah.
And we'd love to stay partnered with you there. But our intent, I think, both companies is to stay abreast with the latest and greatest information and apply those standards and processes to our platforms.
Awesome. Michael, do we have time for one or two more questions?
Sure thing.
All right, I have a great one from Ryan. After a questionnaire is submitted, it turns out maybe a piece of information was missing. How does the provider know to provide that information? Well, the two ways we talked about are to inquire about the status of the prior authorization or to subscribe for updates. One of those updates is doc needed. So in our clinical assistant tool, reviewer can mark this as needs information for this criteria point, and then that status updates the prior authorization. The provider can then see, okay, I need to provide information specifically that answers this bullet point. That's so much better than it works today where you just get a rejection, right? So our goal is to make that immediately available for the provider or their clinical support staff who are trying to schedule patients from their work list, for them to see that exact piece of instruction that says this is the documentation that we need, and then to be able to submit that as an addition or append it to the prior authorization that was previously sent electronically. And again, all of that works from directly within the EHR, and it uses those PAS APIs. And Meryl just shared some information about a recent Da Vinci project meeting where, yes, there is a LOINC CPT mapping need that was raised. So the industry is definitely talking about it, and we're very excited that everybody is working together to solve this problem, because again, this is a win-win. If the providers can focus on providing clinical care and the payers can write policies that hook directly into that clinical care to get the information that they need, then everybody's life is a lot easier.
Agreed. I think we are right at time. So thank you again to everyone for attending. Keith and I are always here. Our emails are on the screen as well. Would love to continue the conversation. But yeah, Michael, we'll hand it off. We'll hand it back to you.
Excellent. Jeremy, Keith, fantastic presentation. Thank you so much. And thank you once again to OneUp Health and Itiliti Health for the sponsors of this virtual spotlight. Folks, be sure to visit wedi.org and click on events to check out more of fantastic educational offerings from WEDI featuring folks like Itiliti and OneUp Health. Have a great day.
Thank you all.
Thank you.